rest in his love. I will trust the Lord, oh my soul.
Yeah, so I'll be up here today. Thank you guys for the opportunity just to share with you. And you know, August, again, August, crazy that it's already August. August is an important month for me. It's this is the month that my wife and I were married, the bride of my youth. And I'm looking forward to celebrating our anniversary later this month. Actually, a day before the Spirit, Park thing. So I believe, right? Is that the right date? I'm sorry. Okay. I like to say it's my August is my anniversary month. So if I do forget the date, it's just simple. I just get all the days. So I love you, babe. There's one specific story right before we got married. So right before we got married, a couple weeks back, if you guys were here, Pastor Ted was here. He was sharing about Breath of Heaven Children's Ministry and what they're doing out in Zambia, Africa. And the year I got married in 2007, we went on a trip. Actually, I went on a trip. My wife stayed behind. She was preparing for our wedding, and she was bridezillaing. She's just a bridezilla, just going crazy. No, I'm kidding. She was nothing close to that. But she was back home. I went out on the trip, and on the way back, we decided to, as we were finishing that missions trip, we decided to journey into the creation, and we got to check out a little bit of England and a little bit of Scotland, and it was pretty cool. There was this one thing, because I love history, and if you guys have talked to me before, I love talking about history. I love talking about military history. It's one of my favorite things. And we were driving through, and we noticed on one of our little touristy bookie things that was telling us, hey, go check out Hadrian's Wall. Anyone know Hadrian's Wall? Okay, a couple of you guys are familiar with Hadrian's Wall. So Hadrian's Wall was this defensive fortification that was built back in AD 122. Took 6 years. It's up in northern England. I'll put up a picture here shortly, but it was under the reign of Emperor Hadrian. It was built to separate barbarians from the Roman Empire. Hadrian believed usually in using natural boundaries like we do, like streams, rivers, stuff like that, like he has in other areas like the Euphrates, the Rhine, the Danube. But in this situation, the way England's kind of structured, there was no natural boundary, so he had to build this wall. And in doing so, that wall was 73 miles from sea to sea. So let me put up a little picture here if I can. Sea to sea. So you can see Hadrian's Wall right there, right across, sea to sea, 73 miles. Okay? And basically, it stood 12 feet high, right? And it had turret towers, so like guard posts and whatnot, every third of a mile. When it was fully manned, it would be about 10,000 soldiers could fit in it to provide defense. And besides being a defensive structure made to keep people out, the wall also served to keep people within the Roman province, okay? Since the Romans had control over who was allowed in and out of the empire, the wall was invaluable in controlling the markets and economy. Executive editor of Archaeology magazine, Jarrett Lobel, he argued once that it not only had physical and economic impacts, but it also had a psychological one, writing, for nearly 3 centuries, until the end of Roman rule in Britain in 410, Hadrian's Wall was the clearest statement of might, resourcefulness, and determination of an individual emperor and of his empire. I don't know about you guys, but that's exciting to me. And the reason why I hear that, I'm like, wow, all right, cool, let's go check this wall out, man. This is going to be awesome. This is what kept all those barbarians out. Let's go check this out. So we started to get closer, and I'm getting a little anxious. I'm not driving. They drive on the other side of the road. I don't know if I can do that yet. It just freaks me out. But I'm like excited, and we get closer and closer, and then finally we get there. And I wanted to see this formidable wall just showing how powerful and how it would be difficult to scale and whatnot, that so many had tried and failed. And when we finally got there, it didn't line up so much with my expectations a little bit. I couldn't find my personal picture, a bunch of pictures, couldn't find them in my list, but I did find a picture that can help with demonstrating scale. So that's Hadrian's Wall. As you can see, it looks like they're having a nice conversation across the wall. Not very formidable in the way that I anticipated. But then again, of course, it was built in AD 122. It's been many years, and as centuries, and as it said, it actually protected the Roman Empire for over 300 years, 3 centuries. So while I didn't get to see what I was hoping for in that kind of thing, to see this powerful, formidable wall, it obviously, with historical reference, served its purpose. I've been thinking about walls a lot lately. And I shared a little bit at Spirit Park when we were talking about the Spirit Park just before. Dawn, it was funny because I was getting these pictures. And Dawn, Pastor Casey's wife, she had come up to me specifically and she said, "I believe you have a word." And I was like, oh, great, here we go. And I got these pictures and it had to do with walls. And if you were there on Spirit Park night, I kind of shared a little bit of what I was sensing. And I want to kind of unpack that a little bit further today. Casey was like, hey, that would be something to kind of press into a little bit further. I said, maybe. I'm kind of thinking about the other, deceit that's going on, the lies and deception of the world, like boneless chicken wings. I think there's a serious issue with us believing that there's actually chickens without the bones. Can I speak about that? And when Pastor Casey in wisdom told me not to do that, I said, okay, we'll go for it with my second plan. So here we are. Well, these walls, though, walls like that, walls, they all come in different shapes and sizes, right? They have a variety of purposes. But at the lowest common denominator, most walls are built to keep things out, right? And for the most part, they do their job. Last year, if you were here, I was speaking on fortresses. We were speaking out of Psalms and how the Lord is our fortress. And it was one of those things where I spoke about a specific fortress, the Rock of Gibraltar, 1,400 feet high, 1,400 feet high, natural limestone promontory. No one was scaling that, okay? I mean, Rock of Gibraltar, you weren't scaling that to try to get on the other side or whatever. So the cool thing was, while these walls are here to try to protect, and they wanted to for like even Hadrian's Wall to protect this Roman Empire for over 300 years, while it does a good job of keeping things out, what often gets lost in how these walls work is sometimes walls keep things in and don't allow them to actually get out. That could be good, but that can also have some detriment. Earlier I mentioned that while Hadrian's Wall was a defensive structure, the empire knew that building those walls up would also keep the inhabitants in, controlling economic markets. You now have no choice when those walls are locked up, once you're locked in the inside of those walls. Choice has been stripped. And like I said, several weeks back, I felt like I was getting this kind of vision, this picture. And it was a vision I had about this season and the impact it has on the people, not only us, but those out there that don't know the Lord. And I saw people building walls in this picture, like masons, using trowels and spreading slurry on each layer of block. I just saw them like kind of building. You put a block on, kind of running through it. But here's the weird part. The perimeter that they were building, it wasn't one of comfort. It wasn't like this huge, awesome fortress. Instead, it was just no more than a foot in front of them and on the sides of them. And as I looked at those people in this vision, it was like, funny enough, it reminded me kind of like a paint and sip class. You guys are familiar with those paint and sip classes? Yeah, some of you are nodding. Yeah, it's like, I don't know, you go there and you're all coming together to do a fun thing together, and you're following somebody's instruction on how to draw something, and then they give you like this built-in excuse by loading you with wine or something like that, so that when it doesn't turn out that you're Picasso, you can say, hey, well, at least we had a good time. And I was a little, you can all work together and pretend like you're a bunch of drunk Bob Rosses or something like that. You're all happy. Sorry, I'm not a fan of the paint and sip classes. But I digress anyway. What I meant about the paint and sip class is the focus on the idea of like you're hearing things, you're following things, and you're just painting away. In the same way, in this vision, I felt like people were kind of just watching others as they were kind of building up their walls and seeing this slurry, and they're kind of putting the next block on. And it was without question. It was just doing it. And then people got comfortable, and they just kept building it up, building up, building up. Eventually, those walls, though, they get so high that surely no one was going to scale them, but the opposite effect also occurs. The people couldn't get out. And I don't think they intended for that, right? And when they were building these walls, but alas, it was too late. They were confined, entrapped, helpless. And it reminds me, especially after Casey was talking last week, it reminds me of what we've been dealing with as we're going through this season. In many ways, the world and even some of us believers have erected up walls in this season. And whether they're walls that are made of a stone of fear, maybe it's a fear of illness, maybe it's a fear of loss, maybe it's a fear of death, or maybe it's a wall made out of pride, unforgiveness, an unrighteous anger, or some kind of superiority disguised as truth. And because we had this good amount of time to build these walls up, it's quite difficult to scale both in and out of them. And it doesn't matter what might be said, even if it sounds logical and within reason, the walls are so high that we can't even hear clearly anymore. Now, don't get me wrong. God calls us to be fortified. Like I said, I spoke about it a while back in Psalms. God calls us to be fortified. But though be fortified was to be fortified in him, okay? If our walls are masoned in our own strength, we have deceived ourselves in believing that we have some kind of holy fortification. And it's easy to be deceived, especially when we believe we're standing for truth or science or justice or compassion. Regardless, if the slurry between the stones is not founded on the word, the walls we build are no longer protecting us, but imprisoning us. It really stung last week when Pastor Casey shared the CDC statistics that in the first 30 days of lockdown, 25% of the 18 to 24-year-olds had shared thoughts of suicide. That's 1 in 4. Only after 30 days. Imagine how they must have felt with a prolonged 13 months of that. Or worse, imagine how they feel probably right now as it kind of felt like we were getting out of it, and it was feeling a little bit better, and there were things that were telling us it was going to get better, and now things are kind of talking about it's not getting better, and maybe it's back to what we had to do before. If the first 30 days generated suicidal ideation, how about the 13 months and a possibility of having to return back? What is that going to do for them? Maybe time to build up those walls higher to keep out that stuff. The only problem is they can't seem to see past those very walls that are keeping them from the peace that they desire, the peace that we know our God, who abounds in peace, has for us. So, the way I feel is, I firmly believe that in this season, God is calling us, and that's what Casey was talking about yesterday, or last week, I should say, that we each have a purpose. We're all on a mission for him, and we believe to be disciples, but also to make them, to share the good news of Jesus Christ with those that don't know it. And I firmly believe God wants a relationship with his children, this harvest that we're talking about, that are trapped in these walls of their own doing. You know, Pastor Casey shared last week that we are those laborers that are called to tend to his harvest. So how do we as laborers scale these walls that are being built so high when it seems pretty tough, pretty impossible? Well, as we learn from the story of the fall of Jericho and Joshua, with God, we're not going to need to scale the walls. Okay? I liken our mission as followers of Christ, winning souls for the kingdom, as similar to what the Israelites' mission was in Jericho. And we're going to walk through that story real quickly here. So if you have your Bibles, open them up to Joshua 6. Give you a moment to do that. But also, just to give you kind of some biblical context, after the death of Moses, God selected Joshua, son of Nun, to lead the people of Israel. And under the Lord's direction, they entered Canaan and began to take possession of the land. The first city standing in the way of Israel was Jericho. And Jericho was a secure fortress with high, formidable walls. Let's take a look. There you go. High, formidable walls. Here's like a rendering of what it might have looked around Jericho at that time. Okay? Got these towers, these 12 feet high walls. I think it was higher than that. And then Jericho was this high, formidable fortress of sorts, but its location was key in its significance too. The city was situated in the lower Jordan Valley, just west of the Jordan River and about 10 miles northwest of the Dead Sea. You can see that map over there. It sat on the broadest part of the Jordan Plain, more than 800 feet below sea level. So in like a dramatic contrast to the desert surroundings around it, Jericho thrived as a fertile spring-fed oasis. In the Old Testament, it was often referred to as the city of palms because of an abundance of such trees. It was strategically located as a border city, and therefore Jericho controlled important immigration routes between the north, south, east, and west. So, this is the place that the Lord is bringing them. And Joshua is called to lead the Israelites to capture the city. And after doing some spying and kind of getting some recon in, then it brings us to Joshua 6, and I want to read it to you. I'm not going to put the full verse up on the screen. I'll read it, and then there's some context verses I'll pull out and share with you guys. So here we go. Joshua 6, verse 1. Now Jericho was shut up inside and outside because of the people of Israel. None went out and none came in. And the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have given Jericho into your hand with its king and mighty men of valor. You shall march around the city, all the men of war going around the city once. Thus you shall do for 6 days. 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. On the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. And when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, and then all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people shall go up, everyone straight before him." So Joshua the son of Nun called the priests and said to them, "Take up the ark of the covenant, and let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord." And he said to the people, "Go forward, march around the city, and let the armed men pass on before the ark of the Lord." Verse 8, "And just as Joshua has commanded the people, the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of the ram's horns before the Lord went forward, blowing the trumpets with the ark of the covenant of the Lord following them. The armed men were walking before the priests who were blowing the trumpets, and the rear guard was walking after the ark while the trumpets blew continually. But Joshua commanded the people, 'You shall not shout or make your voice heard, neither shall any word go out of your mouth until the day I tell you to shout. Then you shall shout.' So he caused the ark of the Lord to circle the city, going about it once. And they came into the camp and spent a night in the camp. Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. And the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of ram horns before the ark of the Lord walked on, and they blew the trumpets continually. And the armed men were walking before them, and the rear guard was walking after the ark of the Lord while the trumpets blew continually. And the 2nd day of the march around the city once and returned to camp. So they did for 6 days. On the 7th day, they rose early at the dawn of day and marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. It was only on that day they marched around the city 7 times. And at the 7th time, when the priests had blown the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. And the city and all that is within it shall be devoted to the Lord for destruction. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. But you keep yourselves from the things devoted to destruction, lest you have devoted them, you take any of the devoted things and make the camp of Israel a thing of destruction, bring trouble upon it. But all the silver and gold and every vessel of bronze and iron are holy to the Lord. They shall go into the treasury of the Lord. So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. And soon, as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, and every man straight before him, and they captured the city. Cool story, bro. Interesting, right? Powerful, miracle-like. But I have this sense that story wasn't just for that time. That story is analogous to what we're called into doing. If you're a follower of Christ, you're a part of something bigger, an army that's called into breaking through these Jerichos in our life. I believe that we have today Jerichos in our own sphere, whether it's family members, whether it's strongholds in our life, personally, I mean, whether it's people that we come across as we go about our lives. We're called to step into that. So how can we take what we're hearing in Joshua 6 and the fall of Jericho to support what we are called to do? Much like how Casey was saying last week that the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. So pray to the Lord of the harvest so that we can have the laborers. How do we get there? How do we labor? How do we co-labor with the Lord in this? Well, let's kind of break down some of the verses that are available to us here. It says, so the first step here is this. Let me see. First step. We've got to visualize and embrace his pre-declared victory. It says in verse 1 and 2, now Jericho was shut up inside and outside because of the people of Israel. None went out, none came in, and the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have given Jericho into your hand with its king and its mighty men of valor. Listen, Jericho wasn't stupid, okay? Jericho wasn't just, oh my gosh, there's people trying to come here. Jericho was a fortress. Jericho knew exactly what significance it had. And yet, when they fortified their position, there was no chance for sneak attacks. There was no way that the people of Israel were going to be able to jump in there when you have Jericho who's on full alert, where nothing went in and nothing came out. For a normal army, this would be like almost like an impossible task to be able to invade a highly alert fortress like Jericho. Yet from God's perspective, the battle was already over. He says, see, I have given Jericho into your hand with its king and mighty men of valor. He can say to Joshua, I have, in the past tense, given Jericho into your hand. In the same way, right now, people have their walls up. They're wary of anything coming their way. I'm sure you guys in your own spheres of life have engaged people where their walls are up and they're kind of like, whoa, what are you trying to share with me? I heard about you. I heard about what you're trying to do. I know what kind of people you are. There isn't going to be some kind of sneak attack coming from this. But what we have to know is that God already has a plan for victory. And we have to be able to visualize and embrace that plan so that we come into that practice with a confidence and a boldness to step into it, so that we're not fearful of, maybe they won't be receptive to what I have to say. They got their walls up, I don't know. I don't know if I can scale that wall. Before we can get into any of the details of how we breach the walls, we need to be able to embrace a posture that God has already proclaimed victory over them. Amen? We have to be able to know, just like it says, his harvest, the harvest is plentiful, so that we have to be able to know God already has this harvest waiting for me. How do we come into this practice? Well, we don't come into it thinking, how am I going to scale this wall? Instead, we come into it saying, the wall's already been scaled, or it's already been breached. The Lord has already declared victory, and we just need to step into it. With that posture, it's going to make things a lot easier, a lot smoother with confidence. Doesn't mean it's going to still might have some stuff we have to do, but at least we can go into it without worrying about the hesitation or a foothold of fear coming with that. So that's first. Visualize and embrace his pre-declared victory. Second, got to lean on faith. It says in verse 3, you shall march around the city, all the men of war. And then in verse 4, it also says, 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of the ram's horns. Listen, I'm no master of military strategy, but marching around a highly alert and fortified city doesn't sound like a good plan to me. To top it off, let's make some noise with some ram horns so that they know that we're here. There was no instruction to the men of war to use their weapons, skills that they were very familiar with to use their weapons and use standard military tactics. Imagine, I think about Joshua, and I think about that conversation, how that must have went when he's getting instruction from the Lord and then he's telling the elders and the men of war. It's like, okay, guys, listen up. We're going to try something different today. I would think as a man of war, if I was a man of war and you're telling me, well, we're just going to march around, we're not going to use the weapons that I've been trained to be a conqueror of, and you're just asking us to march around, I don't know. It must have taken a lot of faith for Joshua to explain this unorthodox plan for the first city that they were called to take. Same with the elders and the men of war, right? They had to have great faith to follow Joshua in this plan because they're risking their lives. A posture of faith when the plan seems strange, sometimes is exactly what we need. Stepping out in the boat when we don't have anything there to keep us afloat, but keeping our eyes on Jesus might be exactly what we need. So we have to lean on faith just like Joshua had to, just like the men of war or the priests and the elders had to. Next up. Third, seek first his kingdom in our engagement. So in verse 6 it says, Joshua, the son of Nun, called the priests and said to them, take up the ark of the covenant and let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram horns before the ark of the Lord. See, the ark represented the Lord's presence. Israel had to keep their hearts and minds on the Lord who was present with them, instead of putting their hearts and minds on the difficulty at the task at hand. In the same way, we have to be pretty careful as we engage our Jerichos to not get overwhelmed with the challenge and try in our own strength to scale that wall, right? It's easy to try to plan something and make it work. But the problem is, a lot of times, man's plans are going to fail because God's plan will prevail. We have to be prayerful about wisdom and in direction in that practice when we're going out there and we're trying to serve people that are lost, helpless, and harassed with walls up. What else do we got here? Fourth, remain obedient. It's a tough one, man. I'll tell you. Verse 10, but Joshua commanded the people, you shall not shout or make your voice heard. Neither shall any word go out of your mouth until the day I tell you to shout. Then you shall shout. He caused the ark of the Lord to circle the city. And then in verse 14, so they did for 6 days. Being obedient can be tough, especially when it doesn't make any sense. Am I right? I mean, it's hard to be obedient when nothing makes sense about what you're being asked to do. But we have to understand and embrace that God might have a plan for his people that builds up the very things we need in that obedience. For example, it takes some serious courage for Israel to remain wide open in attack as they marched around. Remember, they're just marching around. Remember in the map, it showed all these towers where there's people fortifying Jericho. They see the people marching around. And if they didn't see them, I'm sure the ram's horn made it pretty clear that they were marching around, not using any of their weapons, not doing anything, they're just marching. It took a lot of courage as a man. I mean, I don't know. If I'm one of those men of war, I'm thinking, I would really like to use my weapon right now or protect myself, because that's what I'm built. That's how I've been built. And yet, we had to be courageous in following the obedient plan. It takes endurance. They had to do it for 6 days, marching around this thing, and then doing it 7 times over on the 7th day. It takes surrender, which a lot of times can be very hard. To remain silent and have a good look at the walls as you're marching around that seem impenetrable. I have trouble with this one. Neither shall any word go out of your mouth until the day I tell you to. Anyone have that problem? Especially when you want to share truth with somebody. But we got to be active listeners and understanding with their walls what we're trying to get them to hear, because obviously as they build up their walls, there might be a challenge with that. So he's telling us, the Lord's telling us, in essence, be still. Shut up. There will be a moment where I'm going to use your voice to break through. Allow the Lord's plan to be fulfilled before we decide to just step into it with our mouth. Because then we know that it's coming from him and not from ourselves. Obedience builds in us the things we need to see us through the victory. Fifth, take what is promised. It says in verse 16, and at the 7th time, when the priests had blown the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, shout, for the Lord had given you the city. And then in verse 20, so the people shouted and the trumpets were blown. And as soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted with a great shout. And the walls fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they captured the city. Walls fell down flat. Think about that. A fortress, you typically are going to bombard it, hit it with things, maybe your weapons, try to scale it, get over it, over the top of it. But God's plan was completely different. His plan was something that you couldn't even fathom or imagine. Because you think, well, that's a wall. The only way you get around a wall is you breach through it or you climb above it. There's no other way to get past a wall. And yet, God had a different plan. He made the walls fall down flat. You guys have ever seen a demo of a building where it just falls down flat? It's quite a sight to see. You're kind of like, wow, look at it. It looks funny like as you see it. It kind of like just falls in this like melodic kind of just crumbling. It's pretty crazy. And that's exactly what the Lord did in this practice with Jericho. Everybody would typically think, I got to breach this wall in some way, either through it or above it. That's why I love our Lord. That's why I love my God. He's always trying to show us that what we think or fathom is nothing compared to what he has in store for us. Amen. No need to scale them. When the walls come down, we need to recognize it. We need to recognize when the walls come down. And we have to co-labor with the Lord to capture his beloved. We have to recognize when we're dealing with people, these Jerichos in our life, we have to recognize when finally we're at that march, that 7th march, and we're seeing the walls coming down because of the investment we've made in obedience. And that when the time has come, God will give us the moment and opportunity where we're able to shout because we already know that the victory's there, pre-declared, that we will have the victory there. And we will see breakthrough in people's lives, that the walls will fall down and then that they will be captured. I want to share a quick story in my own life about this because I feel it's interesting. So some of you guys know I'm a part of a motorcycle ministry called Black Sheep. We had this large international leadership summit out in Colorado Springs, so we rode out there, I was the planner of the ride, so I had to put together the route and all that kind of stuff. And I took time. I took time and put out the route because you gotta plan everything. You gotta plan your hotel stops. You gotta plan your gas stops. You gotta know where there's going to be gas available, where maybe there won't be gas available. You have to know what the temperature is going to be because obviously you're going to be dealing with potentially some immense heat, which we did, and it would be tough. So yeah, I spent a good amount of time planning out our strategy to go. And we were headed to Colorado Springs. It takes 16 hours to get there, and we split it up in 2 days. We're going to go one day, do a long way, 11 plus hours seat time to Grand Junction, and then from Grand Junction, we were just going to take the I-70 over and drop down into Colorado Springs, and that'd be about only 5 hours. And so, felt like it'd be a good plan. Got it together. It was a rough day that first day. The first day was super hot, so we had to kind of like deal with the elements. We finally got to Grand Junction, a long day, and we go and hang out with some of our Black Sheep buddies from that area, and they tell us, hey man, when are you headed out tomorrow? And we're going, well, we're going to head out at probably 9 a.m. or whatever, and we're going to go on the I-70 straight down. And they go, nah, I wouldn't do that. And I was like, what? And they're like, nah, there's lots of traffic. You don't want to go on the I-70. Now, I had been on the I-70 before because we had gone up to Sturgis, South Dakota for another ride, and I remember there was traffic. There was traffic on the I-70. It takes you through all the ski resort towns, if you're familiar, Vail and other ski resort towns. I remember there was traffic, but I didn't think it would be so intense that we would take a detour and go a different way. But of course, they were from Grand Junction, so they were kind of like, yeah, go this way instead. They said, take this route. It'll be nicer, less traffic, less potholes in the street, less construction. You'll like it. I get a little uncomfortable, I don't know about you guys. I planned this ride. I was thinking like this is where we wanted to go, and the next thing you know, like things are getting changed up on me, but everybody wanted to do it, and I didn't want to, So I was like, all right, let me go figure out another route through that way tonight. So that night, after a long day, we went in and prepared the route, and then we decided to go the next morning. A 5-hour ride. We started at 9. I kid you not. The craziest things happened. We got shut down. Like had to stay in a line, where they do they were blasting rock to widen a road on a 2-lane highway, and so you just sit there. And one time we sat there for an hour, and so we decided, forget that because it's hot, because it was like historic heat again. So we drive back, and we're headed over to stay at a little general store while we're waiting. We had a nice little encounter with a gentleman there, and then we get back on the road because they tell us, okay, in an hour you're going to be able to get back on the road. So we get back an hour later, and it's still there, stuck. And we waited another 40 minutes in the sun on our bikes, waiting for the single lane to stop on one side, and they flip the stop sign your way. So you're like, hey, and you're like, oh, thanks a lot, pal. And we're going through, right? That happened, I kid you not, like 5 more times on that road. Now, we had an event that night, and so we timed it out, 5 hours. We should get there probably 3, 4-ish, and then we can go to the event that started at 5. Perfect. This is exactly what we wanted to do. We had the time for it. What was a 5-hour ride had happened to turn into a 9-hour ride in immense heat, and you're riding a clutch, so your wrists are hurting and your palms are hurting, and you're getting a little frustrated, or at least I was. And I was getting one of those dehydration headaches where you're feeling dehydrated and there's pulses here. My buddy Wayne over here is looking at me and he goes, you okay? You okay, friend? And I'm like, do I look okay? And I was really frustrated, upset. And I started thinking about it, and I'm like, man, if we just went on the 70, we'd be there by now. And this is crazy. This is crazy that we did this. I don't understand why we did this. And I'm getting frustrated in my mind. And then we get to this, we're an hour out from our destination, already an hour and a half late to what we were supposed to go to. And we're trying to all meet up together. We haven't met as a group in nearly 3 years because of this whole thing and just timing-wise. And we finally get there, and we're an hour out, and I'm trying to rush. I am trying to rush. I want to get my gas going. I want to get us on the road, so we got that last hour. We're home free. We can get to the hotel, wash up, get to our little mixer that we were supposed to go to. And then this lady walks by our bikes. She has a bag. She's getting out of the gas station. She walks by our bikes, and she looks at them. And she kind of stops for a second. My wife and I are, I think, the only ones at our bikes at the moment. And she just looks at them. She's kind of quiet for a second. And then she keeps walking, but she says, you guys ride bikes and you do it for the Lord? That's awesome, right? And I don't know what clicked in that moment. It was as if God was giving me instruction like he was giving Joshua instruction that it's time to capture a city. And I looked at my wife and I looked back and we said, hey, can we pray for you for something? And she did one of these. It was the best thing. She was like, she looked at her watch and actually, I got to be going. And then I remember taking a step forward a little bit further and I said, nah, I think there's something on your heart that you want to share. Next thing you know, waterfalls. Breaks down. She tells us this story. She says, this is unbelievable. I'm just wrestling right now because I know of the Lord, but I continue to just operate outside of him. And she's like, I'm a nurse. I help people. And during this time, they really need help. But the problem is I'm addicted to opiates. And so therefore, I continue to take advantage of the position I have, and I use those opiates. And she starts breaking down. She goes, I'm horrible. She's upset with herself. And then my buddies from the Black Sheep start to surround us, and we know what's up at that point. We know as the army of God our call onto that person's life. And we start to talk to her, and we start to tell her that, because she says at one point, I just don't know why God hasn't provided an opportunity to get me out of this. And that's when we said to her, what do you think God's doing right now? And she just starts bawling her eyes out. And the story is tough. She's not just opiate addicted. She's estranged from her husband. She's violated that trust. She's done all sorts of different things. She's estranged from her children. And she's just feeling it. She's feeling it. And in that moment, I was like, we're to take captive this, And we started praying. We started praying for her. And I want to show you a picture. We started praying for this young lady. Right there in the middle of the gas station, and we started just bringing heaven down and saying that no, these walls that you've kept up are not going to stay, that these walls that have kept her from being able to embrace what the Lord has for her completely, we were calling those to fall down flat. Not trying to scale them, we were just calling them to fall down flat. And we were praying and lifting her up, and she's bawling her eyes out. You get that weird part where everybody's kind of like slobber knocking, and you got to, slobber and cries, and they're all like mixing together, and you see that, and you just know it's this beautiful thing, but you're kind of like, wow, that's gross. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, that's what was happening. That's what was happening, and it was just a beautiful thing. And it's funny, because right after that, God was I convicted. Because right before that, man, I was so frustrated with being there. I was so frustrated with, why couldn't we just stick to the plan? And because God had a better plan. God had a plan that I couldn't even think of fathom because I was too stuck in what I thought was the right way. The plan that should have happened. The plan that was the way that we scheduled it to be. And yet God's like, nah, man, this is what I had you for today. This is what I had you for today. Surely you could have went on the I-70, and surely you would have probably made it there in just the right time that you needed to get there, but it wasn't just my time. This young lady, I know, had an encounter with the living God that day. And I thank my brothers and sisters who stepped in it with me as we kind of modeled in that moment that the army of God, when God says it's time to shout, when God says to march around, when God says to stick with and be courageous, when God says to endure, when God says to surrender in those moments, that if we do it, his plan prevails and the walls fall flat. See, the interesting thing about that story, and one verse I hadn't shared and I want to share it with you, is this, verse 19. But all silver and gold and every vessel of bronze and iron are holy to the Lord. They shall go into the treasury of the Lord. When God and his army, co-laboring together, breach and capture lands, cities, like he did in Jericho, they leave all the other things behind that are set for destruction, but they keep the gold, the silver, and every vessel of bronze and iron because they're holy to the Lord and they go into the treasury. I believe that his lost children are his treasure. That he destroys all the things in that city, that Jericho, the walls that are built up in that person. He destroys the hurts, the fears, the pains. He comes and he takes the gold, which is his children, and he pulls them out of that. And we are co-labored in that with him. His children are his silver. His children are his gold. So the call to action for us today, as I feel and I'm feeling in my heart here, is each one of us have Jerichos in the sphere of our lives. So I look around the room, each one of you guys have Jerichos that you're called into flattening the walls down. Maybe individually, but maybe as a collective. But the point is, we're called into a mission. We're called to co-labor with Lord as an army of God to take captive those nations, to take them captive for the purpose of bringing back the gold, his children, for his kingdom. Are we ready to take on the Jerichos in our life, to take back that gold for the Lord's treasury? I believe in this city, we're ready. I hope that as you guys are praying about that announcement about Spirit Park, I believe that night we're going to see more people that are just drawn to that. And they might be some of the Jerichos we need to engage. And I want to pray that in. But first, before we do that, I'm going to call the band back up. If you guys can come up here and just close us out in a song, and then I'll pray us out after the song. Just that, I pray that we will see the walls in those Jerichos in our life, that they would just fall down as the Spirit and the army of God co-laboring moves into those. All right. Are you ready for the Jerichos?
I was singing